Leningrad in 1975 looked magnificent from the outside, but behind every beautiful facade was a city where elevators killed people weekly, water ran brown, and entire apartment buildings were sinking into the ground. You were standing on the corner of Nevsky Prospect and Sadavoya Street. It is November 14th, 1975. The wind coming off the Neva River cuts through the thickest wool coats, carrying a peculiar scent that every Leningrader knows but never discusses. It is the smell of wet rot mixed with industrial chlorine. To your left, the architecture is stunning. The imperial past of Russia stands tall, painted in soft pastels and trimmed with white plaster. Tourists from East Germany and Finland snap photos of the gilded spires. They see a city that survived the 900-day siege and rebuilt itself into a monument of socialist resilience. They see the jewel of the USSR. But you are not a tourist. You live here, and you know that if you step just 10 meters off this main avenue, through a dark archway and into the courtyard, the illusion dissolves instantly. Inside the courtyard of Building 24, the wind stops, but the air gets heavier. The magnificent yellow facade that faces the street does not wrap around to the back. Here, the brickwork is exposed, crumbling and black with decades of soot that the street cleaners never wash away. There are deep fissures running diagonally up the wall, looking like veins on a bruised limb. These cracks are not just cosmetic, they are the soundless screams of a building that is slowly sinking into the swampy delta soil below. Leningrad was built on bones and marshland, and in 1975, the marsh is taking it back. You enter the doorway. There is no lock. The heavy oak door from 1910 hangs on a single hinge, scraping the floor every time someone enters. The smell hits you immediately. It is the stench of damp cat fur, boiling cabbage, and raw sewage. In Leningrad, the sewage pipes are often older than the revolution itself. They are made of ceramic or rusting iron, and they leak constantly into the basements. The ground floor of almost every older building in the city sits atop a pool of toxic sludge. The vapor rises through the floorboards, warping the wood and creating a permanent ecosystem of black mold that clings to the wallpaper of the first 3 floors. You walk toward the elevator. This is where your heart rate spikes. In 1975 Leningrad, the elevator is not a convenience. It is a game of Russian roulette. The metal cage rattles as it descends. This is an Otis lift installed in 1913, cannibalized and repaired with Soviet parts that don't quite fit. The mesh is torn. The buttons are plastic replacements that stick. You press the button for the 5th floor. The machine groans, a sound like metal teeth grinding on stone. You step in, but you keep your eyes on the floor. You have to. You know the story of the nurse in the Vasily Ostrovsky district just last week. The elevator car arrived, but the floor didn't. She stepped into the shaft and fell 6 stories. The local papers didn't print it. Accidents that imply infrastructure failure are considered anti-Soviet propaganda. But everyone in the district knows. They heard the scream. The cage jerks upward. It shakes violently, passing the 3rd floor. You hold your breath. This is life in the era of stagnation. On paper, the Soviet Union is at the height of its power. The space program is thriving, the military parades are massive, and the oil prices are high. But here, in the stairwells of the 2nd most important city in the empire, the physical reality is disintegrating. The state allocates millions of rubles for the maintenance of housing stock, yet you haven't seen a repairman in 4 years. Where does the money go? It goes to the facade. It goes to the paint that covers the rot on the street-facing side, the side the party officials see from their limousines. You reach your floor and wrestle with the door of the communal apartment. Inside, the hallway is cluttered with bicycles, tin wash basins, and boxes of winter clothes. 7 families live in this apartment. 7 families share 1 toilet and 1 kitchen. But the overcrowding isn't the danger today. It's the water. You walk to the kitchen sink. A neighbor, Elena, is standing there, staring at the tap. She turns the handle.
The pipe shudders, banging against the wall, the famous water hammer effect caused by air trapped in the decaying pressurized lines. Then, the liquid comes out.
It isn't water. It is a thick, reddish-brown slurry. It looks like blood mixed with dirt. This is the result of the Leningrad filtration system failing to filter out the peat from the surrounding swamps, combined with the rust flaking off the inside of the distribution pipes. Yelena doesn't look surprised. She just sighs and puts a cheesecloth over the mouth of the jar to filter out the largest chunks of sediment. But the cloth cannot filter out the invisible threat, Giardia lamblia, a microscopic parasite found in beaver feces. In 1975, Leningrad is the only major industrial city in the developed world where Giardia is endemic in the municipal water supply. The systems designed to purify the water were built for a city of 2 million. Leningrad now holds 4 million. The filters are clogged, bypassed, or simply broken. Every glass of water you drink is a biological gamble. But the brown water and the killer elevators are just the symptoms of a much larger, darker pathology. The entire city is engineered on a lie. To understand why, you have to look at the ground beneath your feet. Leningrad is built on the Neva Delta, a collection of islands made of soft, unstable soil. The imperial architects knew this. They drove thousands of larchwood piles deep into the mud to support the massive stone palaces. Larch is unique. When submerged in water and cut off from oxygen, it becomes as hard as stone. It doesn't rot, it petrifies. For 200 years, the city floated securely on this submerged forest. However, in the rush to modernize, to build the metro, to redirect rivers, and to pave over canals, Soviet engineers in the 1960s and 70s disrupted the water table. They drained areas that should have remained wet and flooded areas that should have remained dry. The result was catastrophic and invisible. Deep underground, the tops of the wooden piles were exposed to oxygen. They didn't petrify. They began to rot. By 1975, the foundations of thousands of historical buildings are turning into mush. The buildings are not just settling, they are snapping. You can hear it at night. A sound like a pistol shot echoes through the courtyard. It's a structural beam giving way. A window frame suddenly shatters because the wall holding it has shifted 3 centimeters to the right. In the Admiralty district, there is a building where a ball placed on the floor rolls rapidly to the corner. The residents joke that they live in the Leaning Tower of Leningrad, but they don't laugh when the cracks appear in the ceiling. They patch them with newspaper and plaster, trying to hold the building together with glue and hope. The Housing Committee, the JEC, knows about this. They have maps in their offices marked with red circles indicating buildings in critical condition. Building 24 is circled in red. But evacuation is impossible. There is nowhere to put the people. The waiting list for a new apartment is 20 years long. So the officials do what the Soviet system does best. They hide the evidence. They issue an order not to repair the foundation, but to apply a thicker layer of stucco to the exterior cracks. If you can't see the building breaking apart, then it isn't breaking apart. It creates a psychological pressure cooker. You are trapped in a beautiful stone box that wants to kill you. You rely on systems that function only sporadically, and you cannot complain. To complain is to insult the achievements of the state. To point out the rotting foundation is to question the foundation of socialism itself. So, you boil your brown water. You walk up the 5 flights of stairs to avoid the elevator. You step over the cracks in the floor. You pretend the smell of sewage is normal. But then, something strange happened in the winter of 1975 that threatened to shatter this carefully maintained silence. It started with a series of mysterious illnesses in the Moskovsky district. Healthy workers, young students, entire families began waking up with strange lethargy, hair loss, and unexplainable burns on their skin. The doctors at the local polyclinic were baffled. They treated it as the flu, then as food poisoning, but the symptoms didn't fit. Rumors began to circulate in the breadlines.
People whispered that the water had finally become poisonous. Others said it was a gas leak. But the truth was far stranger and far more terrifying than anyone in District 7 could have imagined. It wasn't something that was broken. It was something that had been built.
In the drive to construct new housing quickly, the endless rows of gray concrete panels known as Khrushchevkas, builders had begun cutting corners on materials. But in 1975, materials were scarce. The sand for the concrete was running low. The quarry managers were under pressure to meet the 5-year plan quotas. If they missed the quota, they went to prison. So they found a new source of sand. They began digging in places that were not on the official maps. They dug near restricted military zones. They dug near old waste dumps. And in one specific quarry, located just outside the city limits, they dug into a patch of earth that glowed faintly in the dark. They mixed this sand into the concrete. They poured the panels. They built the walls of the new apartments. And then they moved the families in. It is the middle of the night in the Kirovsky district, apartment 44. A young girl, 9-year-old Tanya, is sleeping in her bed. Her bed is pushed flush against the concrete wall of her bedroom. It is a new apartment, a privilege in a city of communal overcrowding. Her parents are proud of this wall. It is solid. It is modern.
But inside that concrete panel, trapped during the chaotic casting process at the factory, is a small capsule of cesium-137. It was part of a level gauge from a mining device, accidentally shoveled into the mixer along with the gravel. It sits exactly 80 centimeters from Tanya's pillow. It is invisible. It is silent. And it is emitting 200 roentgens per hour. Tanya wakes up coughing. Her gums are bleeding. Her parents take her to the district hospital. The doctors are overworked and under-equipped. They check her throat. They check her temperature. They diagnose her with a weak constitution or perhaps a severe vitamin deficiency. They prescribe iron supplements and send her back home. Back to the bed. Back to the wall. This is the hidden horror of the Soviet construction boom. Speed was the only metric that mattered. Quality control was an obstacle to the plan. If a load of gravel contained industrial waste, you didn't throw it out. You used it. To throw it out would be wrecking, a criminal offense. To use it was just meeting the quota. Tanya will die within 6 months. Her younger brother will move into the room. He will die a year later. The father will follow. It will take 9 years before anyone brings a Geiger counter into apartment 44. Until then, the neighbors will simply whisper that the apartment is cursed. In a strictly atheist state, superstition becomes the only rational explanation for industrial murder.
Meanwhile, 60 meters underground, while Tanya sleeps against her radioactive wall, a different kind of disaster is unfolding beneath the city streets. You are now in the tunnels of the Leningrad metro. It is supposed to be the deepest, most secure fallout shelter in the world, a marvel of engineering. But the engineers have hit something they call the kozyrets, the visor. It is a massive, high-pressure underground river of sand and water, a geological anomaly separating the Lesnaya and Ploshchad Muzhestva stations. The pressure here is immense, perfectly capable of crushing a standard cast-iron tunnel segment like a soda can. The engineers warned the party committee. They said, "We cannot drill here. The ground is liquid." The committee looked at the calendar. The 25th Party Congress was approaching. Leningrad needed to show a completed line. The order came down, drill. So they drill. And the nightmare scenario begins immediately. The tunnel shield breaches the aquifer. Water doesn't just leak in, it explodes into the tunnel. It is a slurry of freezing mud and sand, blasting through the rock face at hundreds of liters per second. The workers scramble back, wading through waist-deep sludge, abandoning millions of rubles worth of drilling equipment. The slurry is rising fast. It threatens to flood not just the new tunnel, but the entire existing line. The solution they come up with is pure Soviet desperation. They cannot stop the water with concrete. It won't set. They cannot pump it out. It comes too fast. So they decide to freeze the earth itself. Huge refrigeration plants are built on the surface. They pump liquid nitrogen deep into the ground, circling the tunnel. They are trying to create a permafrost shell in the middle of a temperate city. They freeze the underground river into a solid block of ice, and then they tunnel through the ice. Think about that. You are riding the morning train to work. You are reading Pravda. You are complaining about the crowded car. You have no idea that just a few inches of concrete separate you from a melting glacier of pressurized sludge. The entire structural integrity of this section depends on the refrigeration units on the surface never losing power. If the electricity fails, the ice melts. If the ice melts, the tunnel implodes. And the electricity in Leningrad fails often. Meanwhile, on the surface, it is 6 a.m. You are standing outside a store on Moskovsky Prospect. The sign says meat, milk. The windows are papered over or empty. A line of 200 people has already formed. They are stopping their feet in the snow, exhaling clouds of steam. You join the line. You don't know what they are selling. It doesn't matter. In 1975, the rule is, if there is a line, you get in it. You buy whatever is at the end, and you trade it later. Maybe it's boots. Maybe it's canned peas. Maybe, if you're lucky, it's Bluebird. Bluebird is the slang for the chickens sold in state stores. They are scrawny, bruised, and a peculiar shade of blue-gray, retaining the feathers and the head. They look like they died of natural causes after a long, hard life, but you buy 2 of them. This scarcity creates a bizarre paradox. The Soviet Union produces more steel, more tractors, and more concrete than any nation on Earth. Yet in Leningrad, the second capital, finding a decent sausage is a tactical operation. This leads to the phenomenon of the sausage trains. Every weekend, the commuter trains leaving Leningrad for Moscow are packed, not with tourists, but with foragers. Moscow is a hero city and has a higher supply category. Leningraders take the train 8 hours to Moscow, storm the grocery stores, fill backpacks with sausages and oranges, and ride 8 hours back. The stench in these trains is overpowering, the smell of smoked meat, unwashed bodies, and cheap tobacco. The authorities know about this. They call it temporary distribution misalignment, but they don't stop it. They can't. If they stopped the trains, the city would starve. But the lack of food isn't just an inconvenience. It affects the infrastructure you rely on. The workers maintaining the gas lines are malnourished. The crane operators are hungover, drinking vodka on an empty stomach to numb the cold and the boredom. This leads to the gas crisis. You are back in your kitchen. You light the stove. The flame flickers orange, not blue. The pressure is low. The municipal gas network is leaking. In 1975 alone, there are over 400 reported gas explosions in residential buildings across the USSR. In Leningrad, entire stairwells vanish overnight. The cause? The pipes are rusting from the outside in. The waterproofing used on the underground pipes was made from a bitumen mixture that, unbeknownst to the engineers, contained bacteria that eat metal. The soil bacteria are literally consuming the gas grid. The Gas Institute knows this. They have issued a report, Microbiological Corrosion of Urban Pipelines. It is stamped secret. Why? Because replacing the pipes would require digging up every street in Leningrad. It would be an admission that the Soviet industrial standard was flawed. So they bury the report, and the pipes keep leaking. One morning, you walk past a building on Ligovsky Prospect. The front wall is gone. Just gone. You can see into the apartments like a dollhouse. A bathtub hangs precariously from a pipe on the 3rd floor. A sofa is cut in half. The official explanation in the newspaper the next day? Mishandling of household appliances. They blame the grandmother in apartment 12 for leaving the burner on. They don't mention that the gas pressure regulator in the basement failed, pumping high-pressure industrial gas into a residential stove designed for low pressure. The grandmother didn't stand a chance. The stove turned into a flamethrower the moment she struck a match.
But the most terrifying secret of 1975 isn't in the walls or the water or the gas. It is in the air. Leningrad is an industrial powerhouse. Factories are woven into the residential fabric. The red chemist plant sits right next to apartment blocks. The chimneys bellow willow smoke day and night. The filters on these chimneys exist. You can see them. Massive metal boxes attached to the exhaust stacks. But here is the wait, what moment? In 90% of Leningrad's factories, the filters are empty. The filter cartridges, activated charcoal, and specialized membranes are expensive. They are imported or require complex manufacturing. The factory directors have a choice: spend the budget on filters and miss the production quota, or spend the budget on raw materials and hit the quota. They choose the quota. They install the metal shells of the filtration units so the inspectors see them from the ground, but inside, they are hollow. The lead, the mercury, the sulfur dioxide, it is all being vented directly into the bedrooms of the workers. You are breathing it right now. You feel a tickle in your throat that never goes away. You notice the snow on your windowsill turns black within an hour of falling. You assume it's just soot. It isn't. It is heavy metal fallout. And the ground you're walking on, the sinking city, it is about to reveal something even worse. As the buildings settle and the foundations crack, they are disturbing things that were buried in the chaos of the post-war reconstruction, things that were supposed to stay hidden forever.
You were walking through a park in the Vyborgsky district. A patch of ground has collapsed, revealing a hollow space. Children are playing near the edge, looking down into the dark hole. They see rusty metal canisters, hundreds of them. They think it's buried treasure. They climb down. The children in the Vyborgsky Park don't find gold. They find a thick, oily sludge leaking from the rusted seams of the canisters. It smells like garlic and burning rubber. One boy touches it. It feels warm. Within minutes, his skin begins to blister. These canisters are not military weapons. They are something more mundane and prevalent. They are spent electrolytes and heavy metal slurry from a battery manufacturing plant 3 kilometers away. According to the official records, this waste was transported to a specialized disposal facility in the Urals. The transport manager signed the papers. The facility in the Urals signed the receipt. The drivers were paid for the distance. But the trucks never went to the Urals. They drove 3 kilometers to a construction site for a future park, dug a hole in the soft mud, and buried the evidence. The fuel coupons allocated for the trip to the Urals were sold on the black market. The tires that would have been worn down were sold. The driver split the profit with the manager. This is the heartbeat of Leningrad's decay. It is a system called tufta. It translates roughly to padding the books or falsification. But in 1975, it is an art form. It is the only way the economy functions. Every layer of the Soviet bureaucracy lies to the layer above it. The construction foreman lies about the quality of the concrete. The district manager lies about the number of completed apartments. The regional secretary lies to Moscow about the happiness of the people. And because everyone lies, the central planners in Moscow are making decisions based on a reality that does not exist. They allocate resources for a city that is functioning, not a city that is crumbling. You see the consequences of tufta most violently in the places where you are most vulnerable. Let's take you to a Soviet dentist's office in the Petrogradsky district. It is 10 a.m. You have a toothache. The waiting room is silent, filled with people holding their jaws, staring at the floor. From behind the double doors, you hear a high-pitched mechanical whine, followed by a low moan. It is a sound that triggers a primal flight response. You enter the office. The equipment looks like it belongs in a museum. The drill is belt-driven, a system that vibrates the entire floor. But the real horror is the anesthesia. There isn't any. Novocaine is in short supply. Lidocaine is reserved for party officials or major surgeries. For a root canal in a district clinic, you get nothing. Maybe a shot of weak Procaine if you bribe the nurse with chocolate or pantyhose. But usually, you grip the armrests. Why is there no anesthesia? Because the pharmaceutical plant in the next district reported that they produced 100% of their quota. In reality, they produced 60% because their precursor chemicals were diverted to a military facility. But they couldn't report a failure, so they shipped boxes labeled Novocaine that were filled with saline solution or distilled water. The dentists know, the patients know, but the paperwork says the plan was fulfilled. This medical nightmare extends to the most basic tools. Look at the tray next to the dentist. The syringe is glass. It is reusable. The needle is steel. It is also reusable. In 1975, disposable medical equipment is a Western luxury. After every patient, the nurse is supposed to sterilize the needle in an autoclave, but the autoclave is broken. The heating element burned out 3 months ago, and the replacement part is on backorder from Kiev. So she boils the needles in a pot on a hot plate, or if the line is long, she simply wipes them with alcohol. This is why, in the mid-70s, Leningrad sees a silent epidemic of hepatitis B. It moves through the population like a ghost, carried on the dull tips of resharpened needles. You go in for a cavity, you leave with liver damage. But while the citizens are fighting for basic survival, the city's engineers are fighting a war against nature that they are losing. We need to go back to the water. The Neva River is the lifeblood of the city, but it is also a threat. Leningrad floods. It has flooded for centuries. In the 1970s, the Soviet government decides to end this threat once and for all. They begin the construction of the St. Petersburg Dam, then called the Leningrad Flood Prevention Facility. It is a project of pharaonic scale, miles of concrete and steel across the Gulf of Finland. It is meant to show the triumph of man over nature. But here is what they didn't tell you. By restricting the flow of water from the Neva into the Gulf, they turned the bay into a toilet. The sewage we saw earlier, the millions of liters of untreated waste pouring from the crumbling pipes, used to be washed away by the strong currents. Now the dam acts as a cork. The water in the Neva Bay begins to stagnate. The oxygen levels drop. The fish die. In the summer of 1975, the smell of rotting algae and dead fish becomes a physical wall along the coast. The resort beaches of Rapino and Zelenogorsk, where the workers go for their sanatorium holidays, become biohazards. You swim in the water and you come out covered in a green slime that causes rashes. The engineers see this happening. They write reports. The dam is killing the estuary. But the project has the personal backing of the Politburo. To stop the dam is political suicide, so they keep pouring concrete. They are building a wall to save the city from water while turning the water itself into poison. This brings us to the most dangerous intersection in the city, the collision of failing infrastructure and absolute secrecy. It is November 30th, 1975. You are traveling 80 kilometers west of Leningrad to the closed town of Sosnovy Bor. This is a special zone. You need a pass to enter. The streets are clean, the shops are full of meat. This is an Atomgrad, a nuclear city. Here stands the Leningrad nuclear power plant. It is the pride of the Soviet energy sector. It uses the RBMK-1000 reactors. High power, low cost. It is the same design that will be used in Chernobyl. On this day, the operators in the control room of Unit 1 are running a test. but the reactor is behaving erratically. A cooling channel ruptures. This is a level 3 nuclear incident. Radioactive steam blasts into the reactor hall. The radiation alarms scream. The core begins to overheat. A partial meltdown has begun. In any other country, this would be breaking news. Evacuations would be ordered. In the Soviet Union of 1975, the phone lines are cut. The KGB immediately seals the plant. The workers are told not to speak. The radioactive cloud drifts. It doesn't go toward Leningrad initially. The wind blows it toward Finland and the Baltic Sea. But the contamination is real. Inside the plant, liquidators, years before the term becomes famous, are sent in to clean up the spill with mops and buckets. They dump the radioactive water into the specialized drainage system, but remember the tufta, remember the shortcuts. The drainage pipes at the nuclear plant were not welded correctly. The radioactive wastewater leaks out of the containment system and into the groundwater. It seeps into the soil that feeds the local birch forests. It flows toward the Gulf of Finland. Back in Leningrad, the sensors at the Physics Institute spike. The scientists see the radiation levels junk. They call the authorities. They are told your equipment is faulty, calibrate it. They know it's not faulty. They know something has happened at Sosnovy Bor, but they also know that to panic is to be an enemy of the state. So they watch the needles on their Geiger counters dance, and they say nothing.
This is the turning point. The system has moved from negligence to active malice. It is no longer just about incompetent plumbers or greedy truck drivers. It is about a state apparatus that is willing to irradiate its own population to maintain the illusion of control. And while the invisible poison spreads from the nuclear plant, the visible city is about to suffer a catastrophic physical failure that cannot be hidden. We return to the metro, the Courage Square, Ploshad Muzhestva. The freezing technique we discussed, the ice shell holding back the underground river, is failing. The refrigeration pipes are leaking, the ground is thawing, the slurry is finding a way in. It starts with a trickle of dirty water on the tracks, then cracks appear in the tunnel lining. The massive cast iron tubings, weighing tons, begin to groan. The train drivers report strange vibrations. The engineers issue a desperate order: increase the freezing power. But the machinery is pushed beyond its limit. It overheats. On a quiet Tuesday, the inevitable happens. The ice wall breaches. It isn't a leak, it is a geological hammer blow. Thousands of tons of water and sand smash into the tunnel. The trains are stopped just in time, but the tunnel itself, it is being devoured. And on the surface, directly above the break, the city begins to react. You are walking down Polytechnic Street. You hear a sound like thunder, but it is coming from the earth. The asphalt in front of you splits open. A crack 10 meters wide races down the avenue. Trees are sucked into the earth. Streetlights tilt and vanish.
Two massive apartment buildings, built directly over the fault line, begin to tear apart. The buildings on Polytechnic Street do not fall. They hover on the edge of the abyss, held up by the desperate friction of the soil. But below, the battle is already lost. The engineers make the only decision they can. To save the surface, they must sacrifice the tunnel. They open the sluice gates. They flood the unfinished section of the Kirovsky-Bordskaya line with thousands of tons of water. The water pressure balances the earth pressure. The collapse stops. The city is saved. But the psychological damage is done. For the next several years, the glorious Leningrad metro is severed. To get from Lesnaya to Ploshd Muzhestva, millions of commuters are forced onto a chaotic fleet of overcrowded buses that navigate around the sinking asphalt. It is a daily, visible reminder that the Soviet mastery over nature is a lie. The visor won. The mud won. This incident triggers a cascade of unraveling across the city. The illusion of order begins to fray. You see it in the stores. In 1975, the Soviet Union faces a meat shortage so severe that the Ministry of Fisheries introduces a new mandatory policy, Fish Thursday. Every canteen, every cafeteria, every restaurant in the city is forbidden from serving meat on Thursdays. It sounds rational, but this is the USSR. The execution is absurd. The fish provided is often ocean paste, a frozen block of ground krill and fish guts that smells of ammonia, or it is pollock so old it is turned yellow. You are sitting in a factory canteen in the Vyborg district. It is Thursday. You are hungry. You look at the tray. A gray lump of boiled pollock sits next to a pile of cold beakweed. The workers aren't eating. They are drinking.
This is the great unraveling of the mid-70s, the vodka epidemic. In 1975, the state holds a monopoly on alcohol production. It is the single biggest revenue source for the budget, nicknamed the drunken budget. The state needs you to drink to pay for the missiles, but the industry needs you sober to build them. It creates a schizophrenic society. You walk past the factory gates. It is 8 a.m. There is a hole in the fence. There is always a hole in the fence. A worker slips out, runs to the nearest store, and buys a bottle of Moskovskaya for 2 rubles and 87 kopecks. It has a foil cap that cannot be resealed. Once opened, it must be finished. This design flaw dictates the consumption habits of an entire nation. 3 men gather in a doorway. They split the bottle 3 ways, so obrazit na traik. They down it in one go. They go back to work. You are now watching a crane operator at the Admiralty shipyards lifting a 10-ton propeller. He is legally drunk. The welder fixing the hull is drunk. The foreman checking the welds is drunk. The accident rate is a state secret, but you see the ambulances. You see the empty desks. In Leningrad hospitals, the #1 cause of death for men under 40 is not heart disease. It is trauma and poisoning. And when the vodka runs out or the store is closed, the unraveling gets darker. In the pharmacies, the shelves are stripped of anything containing alcohol, rosewater, cologne, window cleaner, glue.
In 1975, a new phenomenon appears in the industrial districts, Boris. This is the street name for BF6, a medical adhesive used for gluing wounds. It contains ethanol. The desperate workers take a drill, insert a metal rod into a bucket of glue, and spin it at high speed. The toxic resin wraps around the rod, separating from the alcohol. They drink the remaining liquid. They call it drilling a Boris. It creates a zombie workforce. Men with violet skin, their eyes yellow from toxic hepatitis, stumbling through the most advanced industrial city in the empire. But the unraveling isn't just about poverty. It is about the paradox of wealth. You have money, you have a stack of rubles in your mattress, there is nothing to buy. The shelves are empty. So the Soviet citizen turns into a hunter-gatherer in an urban jungle. You need a car. The waiting list for a Lada is 7 years. But you know a guy who knows a guy at the auto depot. If you pay 3 times the official price and you bring him a set of imported Japanese cassette tapes, you can get a car next week. You need a toilet seat. There are none in the hardware stores. But you work at a plastics factory. You don't steal a toilet seat. You steal the raw plastic pellets. You trade the pellets to a neighbor who works at a mold-making plant. He makes the seat. You give him half a liter of vodka. This is the shadow economy. By 1975, it is estimated that 30% of the Soviet GDP is purely black market. The state owns the factories, but the people own the product. Everyone is stealing from their workplace. The doctors steal cotton wool, the drivers steal gasoline, the butchers steal the best cuts.
It leads to a moral collapse. There is a saying in Leningrad, if you don't steal from the plant, you are robbing your family. Honesty becomes a vice. If you try to live strictly by the law, you will starve, or you will freeze, or you will have no shoes. To survive, you must become a criminal. This corruption rots the infrastructure even faster. Remember the elevator that killed the nurse? The mechanic didn't fix it because he sold the spare copper wire to a jeweler to make rings. Remember the sinking building? The cement was weak because the foreman sold 10 bags of high-grade cement to a dacha builder and replaced it with sand. The city is eating itself. And amidst this chaos, the government tries to maintain the facade of a cultural capital. It is a Friday night. You go to the theater, the Mariinsky. It is beautiful. The chandeliers sparkle. The ballerinas are world-class. For 3 hours, you are in a fairy tale. But then the curtain falls. You go to the bathroom. There is no toilet paper. There hasn't been toilet paper in the theater for weeks. Instead, there is a bucket of cut-up newspapers, Pravda, Izvestia. The faces of the party leaders are stacked in the bin, ready to be used for the most ignoble purpose. This is the ultimate absurdity. A country that can put a space station in orbit cannot produce soft paper for its citizens' hygiene. It creates a sense of surreal humor, a dark, biting cynicism that defines the Leningrad soul. Two men are standing on the Litiani Bridge, looking at the Neva. "Do you think the Americans have problems like this?" one asks. "No," the other says. "They have their own problems. Inflation, unemployment." "Yes," the first one says, "but at least their elevators don't hunt them."
This cynicism is dangerous. The state knows it, and they are watching. You are in your apartment. The phone rings. You pick it up. Silence. Then a click. It's the prazvonka, the check. The KGB isn't necessarily listening to you specifically. They just want you to know that the line is theirs. In 1975, the dissent in Leningrad is not open rebellion. It is quiet withdrawals. It is the internal emigration. Intellectuals, scientists, and artists stop believing in the future. They retreat into their kitchens. The kitchen culture is born. In the tiny 6-square-meter kitchens of the Khrushchevkas, amidst the smell of boiling cabbage and drying laundry, the real life of the city happens. People drink tea, chain-smoke cheap cigarettes, and tell the truth. They whisper about the sinking buildings. They trade samizdat books, banned literature typed out on carbon paper. They listen to the crackling sounds of the BBC or Voice of America on modified shortwave radios, trying to hear through the jammers. They learn the things the TV won't tell them. They learn that the grain harvest has failed again, and the bread they are eating is made from wheat bought from the United States. They learn that the gas explosion in Moscow was actually a terrorist bomb set by Armenian nationalists. They learn that the infant mortality rate in the USSR is rising, while in the rest of the world it is falling. But the biggest secret? The one that connects the sinking buildings, the brown water, and the radioactive walls? It's about to be revealed. You see, the authorities aren't just incompetent, they are preparing for something. Walk with me to the edge of the city, to the industrial wasteland near the port. There is a massive warehouse complex. It is guarded by soldiers. Trucks arrive at night. They don't carry food. They don't carry consumer goods. They carry dirt. Thousands of tons of contaminated soil are being scraped from the sites of industrial accidents across the region and brought here. But they aren't treating it. They are using it. They are using it to expand the coastline, to build new land into the Gulf of Finland. They are building the new elite district, the sea facade of Leningrad, on a foundation of toxic waste. And they are about to invite the world to come and see it. Part 5. The sea facade was the ultimate metaphor for the entire Soviet experiment. They weren't just building new land, they were building a sarcophagus. By mixing the toxic sludge from the factories with the sand from the bay, they created a solid foundation for the new, gleaming high-rises that would greet visitors arriving by boat. The first thing a foreigner would see was a pristine, modern skyline. They would never know they were looking at a monument built on industrial poison. And this answers the question of why nothing in Leningrad actually worked. Why did the elevators kill? Why did the water run brown? Why did the buildings sink? Because in the Soviet planned economy, maintenance was invisible. There was no glory in fixing a pipe. There was no medal for replacing a filter. There was no promotion for reinforcing a foundation. The entire system was designed to reward production, expansion, and new construction. The budget went to the facade, to the new tunnel, the new district, the new factory. The old infrastructure was left to rot because acknowledging it needed repair was admitting that the original construction wasn't perfect. So the city became a hollow shell, a superpower on the outside, a death trap on the inside. The consequences of this 1975 negligence didn't end with the fall of the Union. They are still felt today.
The visor, that underground river of sludge, eventually won. The frozen tunnel fix was only a bandage. In 1995, the tunnel finally collapsed completely, flooding the line and severing the metro connection for nearly a decade. The Kyotовский-Vyborg line, the pride of the 70s, became a drowning pool. The radioactive apartments? They stood for years. It wasn't until the 1990s that the full extent of the cesium housing was revealed. Specialized teams had to go into residential blocks in the Kyotовский district, cut out sections of the walls, and carry them away in lead-lined containers. Families had been sleeping next to reactor-grade waste for a generation. And the sinking buildings? Many were simply condemned and demolished, their histories erased. But if you go to St. Petersburg today, walk into the courtyards of the Petrograd side. Look closely at the bottom of the walls. You will see the strange diagonal scars in the brickwork. You will see the heavy steel bands wrapped around the structures like tourniquets, holding the crumbling masonry together. These are the scars of the era of stagnation. It is 1975. You are back in that elevator in Building 24. The lights flicker. The cage shakes. You are suspended in the dark, between floors, waiting for the gears to catch or the cable to snap. You realize now that you aren't just in a broken machine. You are inside a broken system, holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable crash. And in the silence of the stairwell, you can hear it. Not the wind, not the water, but the sound of the mortar turning to dust, grain by grain, as the city slowly sinks back into the swamp.